Good morning and welcome to the Tuesday morning Bible study on this June the 20th. It is crazy how the summer is rolling along. In a month from now, we are going to be talking about how the summer's almost over, seeing as schools go back, like in the first week of August, which is completely wrong. It's against all history, tradition, and good sense, but there you go.
I'm sure the students agree with you.
Oh, absolutely they do. And those of us who would like a little more time to plan for the fall can join them in that.
Well,
Uh,
up here, school isn't out yet.
do what?
Up here, school isn't out yet.
Oh my word. That's wild too.
Mhm.
Huh. And when do they
It
go?
will be, it will be.
Once they're out, when do they go back?
Well, they go back in September.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, it's a trade. I mean, it's a trade-off, I guess, but um, then again,
Well, we haven't had it. We're supposed to be in the 80s this week. And this is the first stretch of 80s we've had. We've had a day here and there. So, the kids aren't. When I went to school in June, it was hot. I can remember my graduation was just unbearable, and it was in the middle of June.
yeah. Well,
So,
I think you would be struck, Bev, by how relatively cool it has been down here.
mhm.
It's been a little unusual. I mean, we have not, I don't know that we have had a truly hot day yet. We're going to. It's only a matter of time, but we have
Well,
not.
we went 18 days without rain. So we were, flirting with drought. And then we had a 1 or 2 days of rain and then no more.
Goodness.
We've had
Oh, it's
18 with
weird.
rain, I think. It's
Mm.
really been
only-
rainy here.
Yeah, and I only turned my air conditioning on Saturday. My
Whoa.
house has been so cool.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Now, of course, Lisa loves it to be freezing in
I think about poor Joe, and when I would turn the air on and he would be so cold, and I
Yeah.
would say, "Oh, just put a sweater on." And
Yeah,
now
yeah,
I'm the cold one, and I think, "Oh,
yeah.
I did him so wrong."
Yeah. I just think it's so funny. It's so funny that Lisa has this attitude about it being so cold. I mean, she really does like it to be down like it's 70 or 71 or something. And and it's so funny to me about that because all the times that she would spend all the Saturday afternoons that she would spend at her mother's apartment when her mother lived, when her mother was alive, but her mother lived uh, in Cobb County. And her mom, by contrast, whenever we went over there, I mean, it was 80 degrees. It was kind of your classic old people's house where the thermostat was set at like 80 degrees or something. And Lisa is the complete opposite of that. Complete opposite. And oh goodness. Well, anyway. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We are in Mark chapter 12, and we are going to start at verse 13. We started talking a little bit about it last 2 weeks ago when we last met. 2 weeks ago? Actually, I think it's been longer than that. Yeah, it's been longer than that. But we started talking about it, but I want to give a little bit of a review because I barely remember talking about. I mean, I remember that we talked about it some, but I don't remember too much of what I said. And if I don't remember, perhaps you don't either. So let me at least remind us all of where we were. Last time I did give an introduction to verses 13 through 17. This is the where Jesus he's in the temple. And this is one of multiple stories where Jesus is confronted by the powers that be, the religious/political powers that be, and challenged in some way so as to trap him, put him in a compromising position where he could be accused, he could be eventually arrested, so forth. And yet we recognize that this is a delicate matter, as the text says in multiple places, the authorities are afraid of the crowd because the crowd is mesmerized by him. And this goes to the often unappreciated truth that the Jewish masses, just the sort of the mass of the people, were very, very hopeful about Jesus. And yes, they had a tendency to project onto him their nationalistic, anti-Roman, their hopes and their fears of the Romans and all of that. They tended to project some of that stuff on Jesus. And that was one of the reasons why they embraced Jesus, is because they saw him as a potential liberator. But it was that very popular support that made the authorities so afraid of him, afraid that he was going to be the catalyst to an attempted revolution in which they, the leaders who were collaborating with the Romans, would stand a lot to lose, not so much from God, but from the Romans themselves, who would come in and take away all their privileges and destroy Jerusalem. All right. So what we have here, as we have seen in verses 13 through 17, actually, let's read it again. Then I'll just make those give you a reminder of those preliminary thoughts. Verse 13. Then they sent to him, that is, the Jewish authorities sent to him some Pharisees and some Herodians to trap him in what he said. And they came and they said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth." Oh man, they are buttering him up. "Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Should we pay them or should we not?" But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why are you putting me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me see it." And they brought one. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this and whose title?" And they answered, "The emperor's." Jesus said to them, "Then give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." Or in the traditional King James, render therefore to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." And they were utterly amazed at him. Okay. All right. So with this, what I brought up last time was that we have the enemies of Jesus coming to him in the temple in the form of the Pharisees and the Herodians. Now we talked a little bit about the Herodians, of course. The Herodians were essentially the secularists. They were not people who, they were people who did not pretend to be religious, or that is to say, to the extent that they talked about religion at all, they talked about it cynically. They used it to their political advantage. The truth is that they were essentially secularists who were allied with Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, killer of John the Baptist, who had been installed as a puppet king of the Jews by Rome. For the Herodians, it's important to understand it was deeply in their interest to collect the taxes due to Caesar. Okay. The Herodians were all for the payment of taxes to Caesar. The Pharisees, by contrast, were diametrically opposite them. The Pharisees, as you know, were committed to every jot and tittle of the Jewish law. both the written law and the oral tradition built up over multiple centuries. They opposed the paying of taxes to Caesar for religious reasons, which I'll spell out in more detail in just a second. These two parties then have very precious little in common other than their mutual desire to see Jesus disappear. But on this point of seeing Jesus disappear, they profoundly agree. And so they come together and conspire together. They butter him up with insincere praise. And then they strike with what they frame as a religious question, a question of interpreting God's law. The very question that these two groups debated with each other. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Okay. Now, the reality of everyday life in their time and place was Roman occupation, Roman oppression, and with it, Roman taxation. And for reasons not hard to understand, the great majority of the Jewish people bitterly resented paying taxes to Rome. It was an oppression. It was an oppressive burden on the backs of ordinary people who could barely pay it. All oppression aside, though, the Romans felt very, very strongly about receiving their tax payments. And they had a certain severe way of dealing with those who didn't pay it or encouraged others not to pay it. The question then, is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not, is a brilliant question. It's a brilliant trap because it seems to put Jesus in an impossible position. Either he denies that it's lawful to pay the tax, lawful in the religious sense. Either he denies that it's religiously lawful to pay the tax and runs the risk of arrest by the Roman authorities, or he says it is lawful, it is in accordance with God's law, and he runs the risk of losing the hearts of his followers, most of whom were struggling to get by as it is, and none of them were any strangers to Roman cruelty. And so this time, the enemies of Jesus, diverse as they are, just with these two parties, are absolutely certain that they have him. And they would have had him if the question had been posed to absolutely anyone else. Of course, Jesus sees through all of it, and he goes straight to the heart of the matter. And so he says, show me the coin used for the tax. And so they produce a silver denarius. And looking at it, Jesus asks a simple question. Whose head is this? And whose title? Now, of course, Jesus knows the answer. He knows who it is. But he asks so as to make his ultimate point all the clearer. And of course, they respond, it's the emperor's head, the emperor's title. Now, the thing is, and this is really what we talked about before, but there's a lot to this encounter that is not obvious to us, that would be obvious to any first century Jew. Because Roman taxation was more than just economic oppression, as bad as that was. It was also a slap in the face to the people's faith. It's important to know that the Romans would only accept payment in this coinage. They wouldn't take widows' mites. They wouldn't take standard Jewish money. They would only accept payment in this coinage, which is why you had to have money changers in the temple in the first place. Now, these coins, of course, bore the graven image, and I use that phrase intentionally, bore the graven image of the emperor, which any observant Jew of the time would recognize as a violation of the second commandment against graven images. But from that point, it only gets worse, because there's also the inscription on the front side of the coin, the Latin translated as Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. And then on the reverse side, another title, Pontifex Maximus, the great pontiff, which was Caesar's official ceremonial role as high priest of the Roman state religion. And so if the graven image of Caesar on the front of the coin breaks the second commandment, the inscription on the back violates, well, actually the inscriptions on both the front and the back violate the first commandment, which of course is, you shall have no other gods before me. It's this set of facts that so troubled the Pharisees about the tax, which explains why not only were they against the paying of taxes to Caesar as a religious matter, they would not even carry such coinage on their persons. Okay, they wouldn't even carry the coinage. Now, that they did pay the taxes because everybody had to. And that's why you had money changers. They would exchange their coinage, which was not offensive, and exchange it for coins then that they would allow other people to go pay the tax for them. Okay. But they wouldn't even carry the coin on their persons because they believed it to be a violation of God's law. Okay. And so it follows that when Jesus asked for the denarius and it's produced, it had to have been a Herodian who produced it. Okay. In producing such a coin, the Herodians condemn themselves because they show themselves perfectly happy to use Caesar's coins. Okay, coins which declare Caesar the son of a god. Okay, and so Jesus, first of all, recognizes that the Herodians are hypocrites because the fact that they're even raising a religious question at all stinks to the heights of heaven. I mean, that such non-religious, idolatrous people would even pose a religious question to Jesus in the first place, Jesus would understand as supremely hypocritical. Okay, but then there's the Pharisees who do care about the idolatry of the coins. Okay, they do care about that. But here they are colluding with idolaters. Here they are colluding with idolaters and doing so in order to bring down the one who truly is the Son of the living God. Okay. And so again, Jesus sees the hypocrisy going on very, very clearly. And so now, having established the image and the title on the coin, Jesus answers them, render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar. Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. We've already said that it's a brilliant question, but it's an even more brilliant answer because Jesus avoids the trap. He can't exactly be accused of sedition by the Romans with this answer, as he did say, give to the emperor what is the emperor's. Okay. And notice he says that right after pointing out, or it being pointed out, that it is Caesar's image on the coin. Okay. With the implication then, well, if this has the emperor's image on the coin, it must belong to the emperor, right? So he can't exactly be accused of sedition by the Romans, because he did say, give to the emperor what is the emperor's. But then neither can he really be accused of compromising God's commandments, unlike his questioners who have already shown themselves willing to do just that. The text tells us that his enemies, Herodians and Pharisees, were amazed by his answer and left him and went away. Now, here's the thing. This is where it gets to what this means for us. Because while we might applaud his clever answer, we tend to be somewhat less amazed than the Herodians and the Pharisees were, because we've heard this story for years as Jesus describing two parallel duties that can be discharged at the same time, so as to preserve our good standing as both citizens of the world, citizens of a worldly state, and as believers in God. There's a place for everything. So our traditional way of understanding this text goes. We have our duties to the state, to Caesar, so to speak, and we have our duties to God. We have a secular realm and a religious realm. And respect should be paid to each. Okay. Now, the problem with this traditional read of the story, as you know, that this is what Jesus is teaching us, it's not so much that it's untrue, but it's simply not the point that Jesus is making here. Okay. Jesus is not laying out responsibilities to two separate parallel realms of authority. It's not, again, it's not that we don't have obligations to the state versus and also have obligations to God. That's not so much untrue. It's that's not what Jesus is saying here. He's not laying out responsibilities to two separate realms. What he's doing is he's making a radical contrast between the two. Okay. While the first and second halves of Jesus's answer do parallel one another, that is, obligations to Caesar, obligations to God, they are not even close to being of equal significance, as if Caesar's claim was the equal of God's claim. Okay. Now, in Jewish theology, foreign rulers only had power over God's people by the permission of God. Okay. And so, in Jewish religious understanding, tax may be paid to Caesar because Caesar rules by divine permission. Okay. But when God is done with Caesar, Caesar's power is shown to be nothing at all. Caesar's power is entirely derivative. It's not something of itself. In fact, Caesar and God, from Jesus' point of view, Caesar and God are so unequal. They're so unequal that we might be driven to ask, what, if anything, does belong to Caesar? Okay. What, if anything, does belong to Caesar? Now, some early Christian interpreters of this text looked, as we might, to the image of Caesar on the coin, and therefore granted that at least the coins were his. At least the coins were his. And so, yes, send the coin back to Caesar. In fact, from the standpoint of Jewish apocalypticism, send them all back. Send them all back. They've got his blasphemous image and title on them. They clearly belong to his sorry, idolatrous self, so let him have them. Caesar can stamp his picture and his phony divine pedigree far and wide, but he can't even come near what Stanley Hauerwas calls the true commerce, which animates us. Okay. One of the, and here I do want to share a little bit from my sermon. I've been talking kind of extemporaneously up to here. I do want to actually share a bit of my sermon. This is how I concluded the sermon. I said, one of the most profound truths of our faith is one of the simplest, that all human beings, all of us, are created in the image of God. And because we all bear God's image, we all belong to God. Just as the coin bearing Caesar's image belongs to Caesar, so we, in ourselves, bearing God's image, belong to God. Thus, Tertullian, writing early in the 3rd century, said, render to Caesar Caesar's image, which is on the coin, and to God, God's image, which is on ourselves. Or as the theological provocateur Stanley Hauerwas memorably put it, so Caesar will get many or most of the coins and be flattered by how well his likeness is rendered in the medium of cold hard cash. But the coin of the realm of our flesh and blood is the image of God. What is rendered to God is whatever bears the divine image. And so every life, every human life is marked with that inscription, an icon of the one who is its source and destination. Although we may live under this or that Caesar and may have to plunk down this or that tax and carry out the duties of citizens, we do not belong to Caesar. We never have, and we never will. We wholly belong, body and soul, to the living God. Our ultimate allegiance is not to any country or flag or leader of this world, but to the kingdom of God. And so we are to render to God what is God's. And I said a little bit at the end of the sermon, but I was talking about stewardship season. But I'll leave that part out. Although you can write the checks to Tom Buchanan. So, all right. Okay. Thoughts, comments, debate, discussion, refutations.
I think that's really a very brilliant way of talking about what's stamped on us, the image. I really hadn't thought of it that way, to tell you the truth, but I think it's very good.
Well, thank you. This is the thing is that what Jesus is doing here is intentionally ambiguous. I mean, Jesus knows that they're trying to trap him. He answers in a way that he knows he can escape the trap. Okay. And yet at the same time, he can communicate to two different groups and say completely different things. Romans are going to hear what Jesus says, and they're going to hear that as, oh, okay, well, he's not against paying the tax. So we don't have a beef against him. They're going to hear that because he does say, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. That's right after it being pointed out that Caesar's image is on the coin. So he does seem to say, at least from a Roman point of view, he seems to say, pay the tax. Okay. And yet any Jew, any religion, and I stress on religious Jew, any observant Jew, hearing him would know that Caesar's claim and God's claim are not anywhere near the same. I mean, they're not equal. They're not separate but equal spheres. And again, leading one to the thing, well, what if anything does belong to Caesar? Well, the coin's got his image on it, so sure. Give him, give the coin back to Caesar. Has his image on it, belongs to him, give it to him. In fact, give it all, let him have all of it. Let him have all those coins, because those coins are idolatrous and they're sinful and everything. Let him have them. Everything that matters, literally everything that matters in life has nothing to do with Caesar. Belongs to God. Literally everything that matters belongs to God. Everything about us, our very beings, our very essences, our very lives belong to God. And so, sure, give the coins to Caesar, but everything that you are, everything you hope to be belongs to God. Give it to God, and so Jews are going to hear that and they're going to go, yeah, we need to dedicate ourselves fully to God. Caesar has no claim on us. And so, this way, Jesus is able to communicate on different levels to different people according to their ability to hear, and also escapes the trap. Wow. It's like long, slow clap. It was just so good. So good.
And yet, Tom, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Like Sarah, I've never thought of taking it to that extent, and I really like that. But then my mind, being what it is, keeps going a little bit further.
Sure.
And I think, all right, I have seen religious groups not do what the state or the country needs them to do because of their religion. So I think there is a way in which this could be carried too far as a religious, a religious group or a religious thinker or something too. But and I really do like it on a personal level, but I kind of think it has to stay on that personal level and not become a widespread thing.
Well, there's always a very fair debate, about what claims the state has on us. I think Sarah knows this. I don't think the rest of you do, because I haven't told you. I told Sarah because Sarah asked, but my Summer Saints lineup, my Summer Saint sermon series is going to be starting on July 9th. And in probably another week or so, I'm going to publish the list of the Summer Saints and on what Sundays I'm going to be talking about each one. And one of my Summer Saints this summer is Henry David Thoreau. Now Thoreau he's famous for many things. He's famous for Walden and for getting out and living by Walden Pond and sucking all the marrow out of life and all that good stuff.
Jail too, yes.
Yeah. He's well known for that. He's also well known for having a kind of proto-libertarian view of the relationship of the individual to the state, in that he refused to pay taxes because he did not support and so this is like in the 1840s.
The Mexican War.
The Mexican War. He did not support the United States' involvement in the Mexican War. And so on those grounds, because he did not support that, he refused to pay taxes so as to support what he considered such an unjust effort.
And Joan Baez and others protested the Vietnam War in the same way. Yeah, so he sort of set the precedent there.
Yeah. And and that fact, or those facts, can elicit a number of different responses. You might look at it from the standpoint of, well, maybe the Mexican War, maybe the Vietnam War, maybe they really were unjust. And maybe that is an appropriate response as a protest against something that is unjust. Okay. One might also take exactly the opposite view and might take the view, well, wait a minute. If every single individual decided for him or herself what was just or unjust, we wouldn't have a government. I mean, we wouldn't have we wouldn't have a functioning government if every single individual decided for themselves whether they were going to pay taxes or not. You know, we wouldn't be able to do anything. And yet, and so, and I think it's possible to recognize the moral significance of both of those stances without necessarily saying that one is exclusively true. I mean, for example, I can absolutely see how if every single individual decided for themselves, you know, based on their, say, their religious or their philosophical convictions, you know, whether they'd support the government because the government supported certain things that they considered to be wrong. I mean, as I say, we wouldn't have a functioning government. We wouldn't be able to feed the hungry. We wouldn't be able to have programs that provide a safety net. I mean, there would be all kinds of things we couldn't, good things that we couldn't do. That. At the same time, it is fair to say or to assert that there are certain things that any government, any state does that are unjust, that are wrong, and ought not to happen. Okay. And then refusing to pay taxes is a protest against something specific, and while I certainly would never want to withdraw the right of protest. I would never want to say, well, people don't have the right to protest what they believe to be wrong. At the same time, we also have to recognize that if we just every individual decides not to pay taxes because they don't support something specific, then we couldn't live in society. Nothing would work. And so, because we can get all riled up about war, other people can get riled up about abortion or something and decide, well, if the government, if the government, supports abortion or allows for the paying for abortions, then I'm not going to pay taxes because I refuse to pay for abortions. In other words, it can cut in both liberal and conservative directions, either way. And so, Lois, the point you make is a very fair, very fair point, because there are certainly people on different ends of the political spectrum who have taken a hard line on personally held religious grounds.
The daughter of one of my Episcopal priests down in New Orleans, when she married, she and her husband would work up until the point where they'd have to pay taxes, and then they would stop working. They got by very, very frugally, but they would not pay taxes because of their anti-war.
Anti-war, yeah.
And that was after, the big wars like the Vietnam War. It was later than that, but it was just the whole idea of money going into defense. They wouldn't do it. And so they literally got along without electricity sometimes because they would not work enough. To pay taxes.
Well, I tell you, that's whether one agrees with that particular kind of protest or not, one certainly can't attack them for being hypocrites. There are plenty of people who will do a certain kind of protest until it's inconvenient.
My mother-in-law decided at some point she wasn't going to pay taxes either. But that was because she'd paid so many of them in her life. She paid enough. Well, she stopped paying taxes, and the government came in after she died and took it out of her estate. So she didn't get away with that. Right. Wasn't religious, wasn't anything, except she just tired of paying to the government. So
Yeah,
Tom,
yeah.
I was
Outside
just
reason.
I
Huh?
was just thinking if Jesus had wanted to continue the argument, so to speak,
Uh-huh.
he could have said, even God's image is on Caesar. So therefore, you know, he cannot do, I mean, he has just as, or Caesar did have just as much God's image on him
Yeah,
as any of the rest of the people around there. So
sure.
only because of what he was, you know, only by permission of God, so to speak.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. It's you know, it's not a whatever else it is. It's not. I think that what we have to say at the end of the day is that Jesus is not laying out for us a theory of the state, or even a worked out model of how the believer relates to the state. Jesus is simply not addressing that question. He's not, and it's not to say that it's illegitimate to, you know, as thinking Christians to come along later and try to develop such a philosophy. It's perfectly valid to do that. I think that's not what Jesus is trying to do here. On the Barris level, he's trying to get out of a sticky situation. Okay, on the Barris level. But then on a more deeper theological, with a deeper theological point of view, he's trying to make the point that all of us, Caesar included, all of us belong to God. And that the claim that Caesar has on us and the claim that God has on us are not, I mean, they're just entirely incommensurate. It's not that they're running parallel in kind of equal ways, you know, God, you know, religion and the state, God and Caesar, they're not equal. They're completely incommensurate. And that while, you know, Jesus does seem to be saying that, you know, living in this world, you may in fact have certain responsibilities, certain things that you have to do, you know, living in the world as it is. There are certain things you may have to do. Don't ever think that even if you do have to do certain things, that any of who you ultimately are derives from or owes anything to Caesar. All of you, the essence of you, the whole of you belongs to God and not to Caesar. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't or don't have to pay taxes. Jesus is not teaching people not to pay taxes to Caesar. But what he is trying to do is to show us that whether we need to pay taxes to this or that Caesar, that there's a higher truth here. And the higher truth is that whether we have to pay them or not, all of us belongs to God. And we owe our being not to Caesar, but to God. And so God then has our final allegiance and has the final claim on us. Again, doesn't mean that in time and in the real world we don't have to pay taxes or whatever. It doesn't even really finally speak to that, really. What it's really about is, regardless of what obligations we may have in the real world, all of us belongs to God. Yeah.
Back to what Lois was talking about in our idea that, you know, some people out of good conscience protest and don't pay their taxes. I would refer us to our earlier discussion of and repeated discussion of how we are all compromised in the sense that we may see the right thing, and this is off your point, Tom, but we may see the right thing. But few of us have the spine just stand up and do it. I mean, we know that. And that's one of the great recognitions for me in my life is that
Yeah.
I have all good intentions, and I cheer those people on who do stand up and sacrifice, as Lois's friend did. But I don't do it,
Yeah.
but that's a little digression from your point about this passage, which I think is very valid.
Yeah, yeah. And and it's also true that I think it's human nature to for people to pontificate about what is right and proper for other people to do, and aren't necessarily willing to do certain things themselves. And that's I think that's just built into human nature. I think it's also true that this world, whatever else this world is, it's not simple, and it can't be reduced to only one framework or only one way of looking at it. The world is complicated, and it's the simple truth is that just as people are not, as individuals are not all good or all bad, societies, governments, cultures are not all good or all bad. They're an alarming blend, an alarming blend of the good and the bad, and the light and the dark, and the that you can't separate them. And I mean, in a sense, this would be my critique of a Thoreau, would be, precisely in your attempt to rightly, perhaps, buck up against, what you see, perhaps very rightly, as the injustice of a war effort. You can't address that without tearing out a whole lot of good things too. This is what you may remember the parable, and I forget if we're going to come across it here in Mark. I know it's in either Matthew or Luke or both. When Jesus tells the parable about the sowing of the seeds, and how that the good seeds have gone down and they're growing up among weeds. And somebody in the parable says, well, shouldn't we go and try to pull up the weeds? Well, the problem is, as Jesus says in the parable, in tearing up the weeds, you inevitably will tear up some of the good stuff too. We have to trust in the final judgment of God, when the good and the bad can be separated. Until then, the good and the bad are going to grow up together, and you can't just remove the bad without doing harm at the same time.
Sometimes we all are the weeds.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of weeds growing up in us, and sometimes the weeds that grow up in us are intertwined with the good stuff too. I mean, it's all mixed up together sometimes. It goes to people who, are, I mean, I think about this, just in my own, studies of the past and of family history and of Southern history and whatnot, is that, that the same people who do awful things are also the same people who are capable of tremendous acts of love and charity and goodness, and vice versa. The same people who do wonderful and good and charitable things are also capable of doing things that are terrible. And it just goes to the, and I, you know, and I don't have to go very far. I look at my own life and think about all the range of things of which I am capable. I am capable of the very good and the very bad, you know, and yet I am the same person. You know, I am one person, and yet, you know, have all these potentialities, and so does societies, and so do entire cultures. So do entire religions. You know, it's not possible to say that, you know, an entire religion or an entire culture or an entire government is simply good or it is simply bad. It's
So,
it's
so would the Calvinists say
much more
that's what
complicated than that. Yeah.
would the Calvinists say that we're all born with original sin? I'm
Yes,
not
I think that is the. I think there's so many ways in which Calvinism can be taken in unhelpful directions. I think that is the fundamental insight that Calvinism at its best is trying imperfectly to express. I think that that's what it's trying to express. And that it gets at that the problem of human sin, idolatry, I mean, to use theological language, sin and idolatry. You know, we might use other language. We might use you know, like the therapeutic language, like dysfunction, or you know, or you know, systemic evil, or you know, or things like that. But it all kind of comes down to the same thing, that we can't righteously extricate ourselves from the things that we rightly see as bad. The things that we may rightly, very righteously see as bad and may very well be bad. We can't righteously take ourselves out of them as if they were other than us. All of that stuff infects in human life. It permeates human life. You can't just take it out and separate them. You can't. Human life just doesn't behave that way. And that I think is what Calvin, imperfectly, but what Calvin was trying to get at. And people buck up against that all the time. I mean, people resist that idea for all kinds of reasons and from different religious and political points of view. You know, one of the things that infects the liberal mindset, for instance, is this idea of human perfectibility. You know, this idea of human perfectibility. And I will tell you right now that the liberal vision of human perfectibility is a magnificent illusion. It is a magnificent illusion. Because history shows us again and again that every time people come in and very righteously, with a very righteous frame of mind, try to come along and destroy what they perceive as evil, they inevitably turn into the very image of that which they oppose. Always. You know, and I have found in my own life, and I've lived it. I very much have lived it within my own heart. That for example, the intolerance and the puritanism of you know, conservative, you know, like like a conservative worldview and everything, all the intolerance and the puritanism that I might buck up against in a sort of in a conservative worldview, which be right to resist it, I think. The fact is is that the other side is every bit as capable of the kind of intolerance and and frankly the Puritanism, kind of Puritanism that is every bit as irritating on the left as it is on the right. Yeah.
No, I would look at groups like ISIS and the Taliban and that group in Africa that goes around just killing people.
Yeah, they're pretty awful.
And I would say, find me the good, find me the balance in those groups. And the only way I could do that is, all right, if I could look at one member of the Taliban party and talk to them, maybe I could find a spark of humanity in there. But but in my mind, I can certainly look at groups that I think are just plain evil and are doing plain evil deeds. And I agree with you that everything is kind of equal and
well, no, I don't think everybody is equally balanced. I don't think everything and everyone is equally balanced. I just go to say that there is a mix of the good and bad in everyone.
I know, but I don't see it.
Well,
where's the good in the Taliban?
I'll concede it's a lot harder. And so let me give an example of this is a poor example, but it may give a little insight into one of the things that people like the Taliban are very, very good at doing is they are very good at looking on their enemies as inhuman, as satanic, as they're very good at dehumanizing their opponents. But every now and then there are stories that come along in which that mindset in them is challenged by captors, or I'm sorry, by captives, and something breaks through. There is, y'all know that I'm a big soccer fan, right? Okay. All of you by now, if you didn't know, had not heard this name before, you would know this name by now, almost certainly. Lionel Messi, greatest soccer player of all time. He's about to go to Miami. He's about to play for Miami now in Major League Soccer. Lisa and I are going to see him play on September the 16th against Atlanta United. Messi is the biggest soccer star in the world. Okay, here's the thing. There was and I do not remember who it was, but there was somebody who was kidnapped by Al-Qaeda. Okay, not the Taliban, but by Al-Qaeda. And I forget the guy's name, but he was kidnapped by Al-Qaeda. He was held captive under terrible conditions. He was determined to find common ground. Now, often it is the case that you can break that if you're a captive, it's well documented that you can sometimes break through with somebody, no matter how hard their entrenched position is, that you can sometimes break through by showing pictures of your family, show pictures of your kids, your wife, your husband, because, if you do that, you might remind a member of Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, I'm a member of Al-Qaeda. Well, I have a little girl too. You see a picture of a little girl here. Well, I have a little girl. It's kind of like, so, okay. So I can understand human connection. I can understand, I'm a member of Al-Qaeda, and yet, I'm a hateful person in so many ways, and yet I love my little girl, and I'm tender towards my little girl, and I love my family, and maybe what I do is out of some screwed up vision of protecting them, you know, or something. So anyway, but I love my little girl. Well, anyway, what the guy did was he somehow or another, and I forget how he did this, but he found common ground in soccer. And he was talking about, just one day he casually mentioned that he was a Barcelona fan. And by extension, a big Lionel Messi fan. Well, guess what? So was one of his captors. One of his captors, like, Messi, Messi, you know, it's like, oh yeah, Messi, you know, it's like, and so all of a sudden, you have this human connection between this entrenched Muslim ideologue who was perfectly prepared to shoot this guy on sight when he took him, and this captive. And now suddenly they're connecting over something in common. And he ultimately was released, because once that construction is cracked, that absolute construction that sees the other person as a nothing, as a non-human, once that starts to crack, that, you know, it's just like a crack in a window. It has a way of getting bigger. The crack has a way of getting bigger over time, such that you can no longer maintain, if you're the bad guy here, you can no longer maintain the illusion that the other person is a non-human. And the more you can see them as a human being, and this is almost universally true unless you're a complete sociopath, the more you see somebody else as human, the less harm you can do to them.
You know,
Yeah.
there's another example of that.
Mhm.
When I studied early American literature, and I studied about the Puritans coming in and the stringency of some of their beliefs. And one of the historians, I think it's Perry Edwards, one of the great historians, said one of his theories was that Calvinism, stringent Calvinism, failed in this country because people looked to their neighbors and they saw goodness. They
Mhm.
didn't see, you know,
Yeah.
the sinful, depraved creature. And that has just stayed with me all these years, because I think that's right. I mean, I grew up Presbyterian and hearing all about original sin in very quick ways. So that's another example of that.
Well, you know, it's so curious because Calvinism can cut both ways on that score, you know, because, you know, here I am, I'm actually using, and I understand what you're saying, absolutely, because it is, I mean, to see other people primarily as sinners is really a horrible way to look at people, you know, just kind of all the time. It's interesting though, because it can cut the other way too, because I'm actually, the way I just discussed it a while back, was I was actually using the doctrine of original sin as a way of getting at the idea that we're all in this together. You know, actually as a means of building up a sense of human solidarity
and community. Yes.
and community. That we're all infected by sin, but here's the thing, is that you're infected, but so am I, and this is something we have in common. Now, as long as we can then proceed with humility towards each other, you know, a sense of acceptance and a sense of humility, like holding our own beliefs and our own convictions, if we can hold them with a certain kind of lightness, doesn't mean we should stop believing everything we believe, but we hold them a little less tightly, and we have a little more humility in our relationship to other equally flawed human beings, as equally flawed as ourselves human beings. if we can approach our fellow human beings with humility in the knowledge that the same darkness I may see in other people lives within me also. It ironically, that view can also be a means of getting along with people, you know? or it can be a means by which I look at other people whose views I find infuriating, you know, whose views, whose worldviews, whose perspectives I absolutely don't agree with and will never agree with. You know, I mean, just, you know, very bluntly, we'll say I will never agree with. But allows me to look on other people with a lot, frankly, a lot more grace than I might otherwise would if I'm looking at other people as sinners and me as the righteous judge, you know, who is qualified to look at another person, speak into another person's life and declare them evil, declare them, you know, it doesn't work that way, you know. And I mean, it's understandable because I think it's human nature to do that, but it's also persisting in a kind of unreality. It's persisting it's persisting in an illusion that we can in any way extricate ourselves from the very things that we see very clearly in others. This is what Jesus was talking about when he said, you know, don't judge. You know, the same measure that you give is the measure you'll get. And why do you see the speck in your brother's eye when you don't recognize the log that's in your own? Again, it doesn't mean that we should not point out and seek to remedy, you know, or seek to change things when we see them. It doesn't mean that. That's not judging. What judging is when we place ourselves in a morally superior position. Doesn't mean we should never try to change anything. It means when we put ourselves in the position of God, frankly, and hold ourselves as the righteous ones versus the unrighteous ones. That's what Jesus is condemning with the teaching on not judging. Because if you took it the way it sometimes is taken, you would never try to address anything that was wrong. I mean, you would never try to do you would never try to offer gentle correction to anyone, a child or another person, your next door neighbor, or even yourself. I mean, you would never try to do it. And that obviously is not. That's obviously not right. I mean, that's obviously not what Jesus is.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but I have to be someplace at 11:30. So bye.
Okay, bye-bye. We're about to sign off anyway. I've been preaching. I'm a preacher, and so I guess I'm prone to do that sometimes. But anyway. All right. Well, real quick. We'll wrap up today. We'll start back up with verse 18. A really wonderful passage where once the Pharisees and the Herodians go off the stage, the Sadducees get their turn and have the question about the resurrection. Oh boy, we're going to have some fun with that. That's up for next week. And so, I will say in about another week, I'll be releasing my Summer Saints lineup. And I hope that we'll have our video production side of things here at the church fixed so that we can properly record these services. Because for the last few weeks, we've had some issues on our video. And so we've not been releasing or posting worship videos. Hopefully we'll be able to get that fixed soon. But the Summer Saints lineup is coming up, and we do have, as I've told Sarah, we have some really good ones. We've got Henry David Thoreau, Bob Dylan, Maya Angelou,
Simone Weil.
Simone Weil, Simone Weil, oh gosh, there's and William Blake. Ah, wow, we're gonna tiger burning bright. We're gonna shine bright that night. So yeah, that's gonna be great. So look out for that. I'll be you'll get a notice of what Sundays or what subject. So all right, well, let's close with prayer and then we'll be on about our days. Lord, we give you thanks for this time and for this opportunity that we have every week to come together. We thank you that we've had the opportunity to gather today after a few weeks off, and we are grateful for the time that we have with and for each other. Lord, we do pray that you impress on us the lessons of this text that we've studied today, and to just rest in its depths. It's clearly one that is full of insight and full of things to reflect on. And we pray that you help us to wrestle with those things as we seek to walk with you. We pray for all those whom we continue to remember in our prayers. We lift them up now. We pray for peace in the world and for justice to be done. We pray all these things now in Christ's name. Amen.